All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Patrick King here over at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I am the science fiction and fantasy selector here at the Poison Pen, and I have got the great honor of talking about Lives of Bitter Rain with the one and only author, Adrian Tchaikovsky. Adrian is an amazing writer. He is written so many series in just a short amount of time. He's really giving Brandon Sanderson a run for his money. He is the Arthur C. Clarke BSFA Award and British Fantasy, British Science Fiction, and Sideways Award winner. You are by far one of the most awarded authors that I've had the honor to talk with today. And Adrian, it is such an honor to chat with you today. Thank you so much for joining us and taking some time.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Absolutely. Your newest book is a novella within the Tyrant Philosophers series. And so, I'm really curious. You're giving us a prequel of one of the main characters that we see throughout, or one of the main characters in your third book within the series. And so, I'm really curious because this is a great intro. Not only is it a prequel a little bit to your third book, but it is a great introduction to the Tyrant's Philosopher series. So I'm very curious to hear about what inspired you to write the novella and what made you decide to focus on this book here for your next project.
I mean, I think this is where we bust out the with nail and I gif, and this is sort of I wrote a novella as a mistake. Um, what was going on is so this is an odd series for me as far as writing process goes because first of all, each book is intended as well as being part of a series. You can kind of pick up any book and it should make
Yeah.
sense on its own. Which is getting more difficult as the series goes on, as you can probably imagine. But the other thing is, unlike most of my work, I'm not planning. I'm certainly not plotting. I'm not plotting or indeed planning these books out in advance. So normally I would have like a chapter by chapter breakdown before I started the book, and in this case, I'm building the world and the characters, and then just kind of setting them in motion and following everyone around with a notebook, which gives this sort of interlocking mosaic structure to the books, which I rather like. But it also means a lot of unintended things happen. And in this case, when I was planning the setup for Days of Shattered Faith, the third novel, I thought, all right, it looks like we are going to be focusing on one character a lot more than in the previous books, which are a bit more of an ensemble. So we have this character, Angilly, who is a diplomat, and we meet her kind of at the peak of her profession. It's at the end of a big war, and she's obviously had a very complex career behind her, which I felt, well, I kind of need to know because I'm not planning the book out. I need to know this character very well if I'm following her around for that much of the book. So I will write a couple of little vignettes about her past to get a bit of a feel of her. 30,000 words later, I had written an entire novella length piece about Angeli's early career, which not only sets her up pretty much right to the moment that we meet her in Days of Shattered Faith, but also turned out to provide a really interesting view on just the behind the scenes going on in the world because this is the book where we travel to a lot of different places. We get the world map in this book because that seemed relevant because she is in the diplomatic service. She's getting posted all over the place across her kind of earlier career. This is the book where we see the mechanics of the Palleseen sway and how it all works and all the little rivalries and conflicts and procedures that give us the outward show of the Palleseen sway that we've seen in the other books. And it just turned out to be, first of all, just really, really useful for me to have written it because then I knew so much more about the setting than I did before. But also, it made this little piece, novella length piece on its own, taking us from Angeli's childhood all the way through her career to the point that we meet her as an established ambassador in the Days of Shattered Faith.
And Angli is a really interesting diplomat because she's living and she comes from a higher level, a more noble class, so to speak. And her parents, who happen to perish while in service, um, leaves her as an orphan, and so she's sort of stuck, and she'd rather do the things that really interest her rather than follow the family, um, the family role, so to
Yes.
speak, as a diplomat. So I'm very curious. I mean, she seems like she still struggles throughout this, whereas in um Days of Shattered Faith, it seems like she's sort of gotten herself more accustomed to that role. So it was a really interesting evolution, and it gave us a little bit of a different look on who Angly really was or is.
Yes, and I mean she is an interesting character. The for Days of Shattered Faith, the kind of the essential question that the book is built about is, can you be a good person working inside a bad system? Because Angeli is, she's eminently sort of hero material. At various points in the book, she's called upon to make these moral choices, and she always tries to make a genuinely principled choice. But at the same time, she's working for the bad guys. The palace, she's part of the Palleseen, who are this sort of monstrous colonizing imperialist force. And the basic answer to that question, as it plays out, is actually no. But so in Lives of Bitter Rain, you get to see really how, to a certain extent, how she can still be a decent person at the point where we meet her in Days, but also there are various fractures that she runs into and various issues and dissatisfactions and problems in the relationship between her and the nation state that she's working with that sort of sit up the fact that of how she goes off the rails during the course of Days.
It's really an interesting take, and your entire series explores the ideas of colonialism, world expansionism, and countries that sort of take a forefront within world politics, and some of the challenges that are associated with being sort of that world and being that world power, so to speak. Whether we look at it at the Roman Empire, British expansionism, even the United States currently, it's a really interesting, and you take a real philosophical stance in terms of what it means to be a world power and the challenges of bringing outside cultures into your own culture. And the Palestinians, for instance, are really great about destroying other faiths, other belief systems.
The Palleseen.
Palestine, sorry.
Yes, I mean they are. So Palisand is sort of, it's equal parts the British Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire and sort of post-revolution Russia and all of these different. Because one of the things, once you start doing a bit of historical research, there's this rather depressing arc that all of these states kind of follow,
Hmm.
which is you've got the surface layer, which is all of their ideological justifications for why it is right that they turn up and just incorporate other places into their sphere of control. And then below that, everyone is making out like a bandit, stealing all of the resources, which in this case includes sort of magic, imposing their language and culture, all of this stuff that you see over and over and over again. It's very much sort of, well, we have the only proper model to live by. And it is virtuous and just and proper for us to export this to all of these less developed places that we've discovered. Which was very much the British playbook all the way through the sort of 18th and 19th century. And at the same time, you then look at what the East India Company got away with, for example, which was just this massive asset strip mining of everything of value they could possibly get their hands on, all of which gets carted back home and makes a lot of, well, makes a quite relatively small number of people exceedingly rich. Um, and yes, I mean, it's the same, that's those sort of twin engines of profiteering and ideology are fascinating to write about, but it is a bit depressing the way that that's kind of always how it goes. I mean, there's something. It's almost peculiar that we do seem to still need the ideology. You know, that no one turns up and just profiteers. There's always some sort of fig leaf of why it is just and correct for us to do this. And this is something I if anyone's read my Alien Clay, there's a bit there where the main character is talking about the idea that there is something in the human psyche that means we need some sort of appeal to a higher cause in order to enact our tyrannies, whether that is scientific or religious or philosophical or whatever. We still seem to need this outside justification to do the terrible things we do.
Oh, 100%. I think that that's something, I mean, we talk about, the fact that Britain going into China, for instance, became the world's probably largest opium dealer.
Yes,
Um,
yes, it's
and,
it's it's an astonishingly shameful. Um, Even amongst all the other shameful things that were going on, it's a particularly shameful part of British history.
absolutely. I mean, but United States is also, I mean, in terms of Western expansionism, I mean, it was, the Trail of Tears and taking the indigenous people and putting them into the least, um, uh, the the worst land
Yeah,
possible
yeah.
for growth, for farming and growth while we took over the rest of it. And there's some sort of attempt um, of forgiving by allowing them to have their own nation states and things like that. And Arizona is very interesting because of the fact that we've got now these really wonderful, and we've got the Pima and the Navajo and a lot of other indigenous cultures here in the state. And you go on to the reservations there, and it's a completely different set of laws, and you're able to do some things that they're like gambling, things like that aren't necessarily available. But those were it was a way to give back economically, but whether or not it was fully the right choice, it's and you look at those sorts of things within the books. You look at your outcomes, your and what each of the cultures has to deal with this idea of a group coming in. At first, it just appears diplomatic, and then it takes a very dark turn.
Yes, I mean, and you see different layers of the process. So in the first book, it's an occupied city. Um, in the third book, it's that preoccupation level where they're doing diplomatic softening up. Basically, so Angilly is part of this department called Outreach, whose job it is to really prepare a foreign state for incorporation into the
Exactly.
sway. I mean, ideally, without actually having to send the troops in, because that obviously is a lot cheaper. And then in the next book, which I've rather grandiosely called "Pretenders to the Throne of God," you get to see the bit in between, the bit that comes immediately after, where it's an active siege, where the city in question is being violently incorporated into the sway. So it's the bit that happened, what it would have been 3 years ago for Ilmar when we see it in City of Last Chances.
It's an incredible world that you've given us, and you live in so many different worlds, which is outstanding. I don't know how you keep track. What is your sort of your writing lifestyle and life cycle, so to speak, in terms of where you decide where to write to next, other than contract, I'm sure.
I mean, deadlines is a lot of it at the moment. I'm a bit overcommitted at the moment, so I'm kind of almost running double time to get everything done. But generally, I only ever write one thing at a time. But at the same time as you're writing anything, you will get this sort of conveyor belt of edits and various other layers of not writing but book related tasks turning up. So I'll be writing and then I'll be sort of processing all of these different stages on sort of 3 or 4 books at a time. But it's only really the writing that you need to focus on the details, because otherwise, it's all already there on the page when you're reading through and making changes.
Absolutely. But if you're getting if you're getting edits back for an Alien Clay and you're writing the Tyrant's Philosophers, do you find that a little bit jarring in
No,
terms of
no, no, it's
feedback?
it's editing kind of uses a different part of the brain. I think it's genuinely interesting. Like, and the basic getting the words down on the page for the first time, that point of creation is very jealous. I can definitely only do that for one project at once, and my mind is full of that project. But it's very easy to do sort of writing adjacent tasks on other projects. So as well as, say, editing another book or even a couple of other books, in quick succession, because you'll often get that if if you're churning out as much as I am. Um, I've had situations where I've been doing like piecework for games companies where I'll be doing like, they'll say, make, do us 10 monsters or do us 10 sort of locations and things like that. And that, because it's not narrative, it doesn't occupy the same part of the brain, which I found really interesting. So I can double up like that and write in the mornings and then do the non-writing, but still work-related stuff in the afternoons.
It sort of breaks up the day, so to speak, so that you're not just focused on, you could sit there and probably write for 8, 9, 10 hours and produce, but by
I mean,
breaking it up.
honestly, no. I have a thing. So the way I tend to think of it is I have a well, and in a writing session in the morning of like sort of 2 to 3 hours, I'll empty that well, and then I need to leave it to recover. So part of my mind will be working out, well, right, what happens next, and that will hopefully have me set up for the next day that I can sit down in the morning for that. And if a book is going particularly well, I might get a couple of sessions done in a day, especially if it's right towards the end where things tend to speed up. But having something else, whether it's administrative or edit or something like that, to do in the afternoon, which isn't drawing on that well, is really useful.
My day job, I work as an analyst, and I do a lot of coding. So usually I do the coding build first thing in the morning, and then all those administrative, writing those emails and responding and doing all of that. And sort of in the same sort of boat that if by breaking it up throughout the day, then I find that I'm much more productive than if I, try to sit and focus and do one thing the entire time. Um, what are some of your favorite side sort of works that you do, or your administrative tasks that you do during the afternoon after you're done with your writing session?
I mean, it's not really a question of favorites. It's whatever comes in that needs doing. So I'll just have a list. I'll have an email folder of all the stuff that's coming that I need to deal with. So there might be interviews, or I might need to look over a contract. There might, I mean, I think in the last 2 months, I've had 3 entire sort of final proof manuscripts to go through. They all just landed on my desk very, very closely, one after the other. And they usually have quite tight turnarounds. So yeah, when that turns up, that's what needs to get done. But when you get to this sort of stage in a writing career, there's usually something that's requiring your attention that is not actually writing a book.
There's an awful lot. I mean, like tonight doing the interview, and we're greatly appreciative of you taking your time to talk about Lives of Bitter Rain. Um, one of our online audience members, Robin, she's from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and she was really curious about your world building and the amount of effort that it takes. And she's very impressed with it. And she's very curious of where this creative imagination stemmed from and how early in your life did it begin? And leading into that, what made you decide to take the plunge to become a writer?
So, world building is very much the cornerstone of my personal process. And I should stress this is very much me. Different writers have different ways of doing things. I'm certainly not saying this is how you write a book. But for me, it is world building. And in fact, when I'm writing a book, my aim is really to show you through the best combination of characters and plot what the world is like. I will find the plot, or the world will suggest the plot that will showcase the interesting part of the world. Because I'm writing science fiction and fantasy, and interesting worlds are a very big part of what that's about. So I will start off and put a lot of work into building that world up, thinking through the logical implications, going from the big picture stuff, whether it's big scientific ideas or metaphysics or something like that, through to characters, factions, places, all of that stuff before I start writing. And honestly, this is that as a process is something I brought along from role playing games. So, tabletop role playing games, Dungeons and Dragons, from about age 13, that was my big hobby. And you build a lot of worlds doing that because, we didn't generally use pre published scenarios or set things in the Forgotten Realms or anything like that. We were always making up our own settings. And you invent a lot of characters for that. And all of these turn out to be eminently transferable skills if you're then going on to write prose. And what actually happened was at about the age of 17 or so, I ran into the Weiss and Hickman books, the Dragonlance Chronicles, which are a Dungeons and Dragons campaign that was turned into a set of novels. And that was the little light bulb moment of this is a thing I could do. And I mean, what actually happened was it took me basically 15 years of trying to get published to get anywhere close. And for a lot of that time, it wasn't really a thing I could do, but I was at least incrementally getting better every time I wrote another book. But that was the almost like the permission moment of there is a direct line from where you are as someone who just plays these games to where this is, which is it's a published book that has the potential to reach a larger audience.
It's amazing how much world building you have to do, and the fact that you're doing it both in a scientific or a science fiction and a fantasy worlds. You're able to go through. Not a lot of authors feel comfortable enough doing that within their skills. You don't see too many authors who are willing to sort of cross the genre from fantasy to science fiction or science fiction to fantasy. You're very unique in that.
What I honestly, I mean, I'm not. It's certainly not a unique thing. I mean, for example, two examples: Anne Leckie, Brandon Sanderson, both
Sure.
very well known. The first for science fiction, but then she's gone on to write fantasy, and vice versa for Sanderson. I suspect that actually a lot more authors than get the chance would quite like to be able to move around
Mhm.
within the sort of the genre space like that, but you tend to get pigeonholed by your publishers. And I
Mhm.
mean, I still have, I am very lucky because I work with multiple publishers
Mhm.
that I get to do different types of work. And I'm inordinately grateful because it gives me a huge amount of enjoyment to do so. But for example, Pan Macmillan or Orbit in the US very much want science fiction from me. And they wouldn't, I think, want the Tyrant Philosophers books because that's not they are selling to a very particular audience, and that's really the audience that came for Children of Time and will probably go as far as maybe the Architect series, which is space opera, which is this kind of you're shifting along the fantasy sci-fi continuum a bit towards fantasy with that kind of stuff because it's not dealing with that hard science fiction, but that it's a readership that is probably more interested in Shroud and Alien Clay and even Service Model than it would be with the Tyrant Philosophers books, or than it would be with my because I was a fantasy author originally before I had a bit of a punt and decided to write about giant spiders from outer space. So back then that was Shadows of the Apt, which was my big series, ridiculously big series, in fact. Which again, it's a lot of the people who are along for the hard sci-fi are probably aren't interested in.
I thought of myself for the longest time as a fantasy reader, and I think took me going into the Ursula K. Le Guin, her writing, and then breaking into Marion Zimmer Bradley, associated with her series of Darkover, which crosses that science fiction and fantasy line. And I really, really liked the early stuff that was a little bit more harder science fiction. Um, and I look at you within that aspect as well, that you're able to write both equally well. And you've got readers who really enjoy very hard science fiction and those who like really heavy fantasy. But I think most of your readers are willing to read anything that you write
That
because they enjoy your writing style and your world. And one of the things that I think you're incredibly strong about is focusing on the sociological and the psychological implications of your characters within whatever situation they find themselves in, whether they're in space or an alternate world.
yeah, I mean that's there are a few themes really that have been turning up in my work since the very beginning, since the Shadows of the Act books, and just haven't gone away. And one of which is I'm always very interested in power structures
Hmm.
and abuse of power and corruption. You see it with the Wasp Empire in Shadows of the Apt, and you can see it in recent books like the Concerns in the Shroud or the Palace, the Palleseen. It's very specifically the Palleseen in Tyrant Philosophers, and it's just looking at different ways that those structures work and the different sorts of abuse that they impose, and also looking at different ways that they can be opposed.
Do you have a favorite world that you are writing in at the moment, or are they all kind of special because of where they were in your writing career?
I think honestly, the Tyrant Philosophers world is my favorite to write in at the moment. I enjoy because of the different process I'm bringing to it. It's got an extra level of discovery where I'm kind of finding out about the world and the characters are showing me things about the world, and all of these little kind of synergies are turning up between think independent things that I've thought to bake in at the beginning, then sort of they flower and cross pollinate and create all of these weird things that I could never, I think, have just sat down and intentionally worked into a book. So it's a bit of an extra joy to work in that setting.
And it probably fits in really well with your love of world building and especially Dungeons and Dragons. And do you still use some of the I guess those ideas from Wizards of the Coast if they're, chaotic neutral or, getting an idea sort of based off of those sort of criteria of how to
Um,
begin the basic build for them? Or-
I mean, not at that level. Although, I mean, I suppose it's worth noting we've recently had a reissue of an older book of mine, Spiderlight, which is very much deconstructing the Dungeons and Dragons sort of world,
Mhm.
where you have this very sort of baked in idea. Well, there are good things and evil things, and what happens if that? What are the implications of having that detect evil spell in your armory? Um, but I think that one of the biggest things you get from role playing games as a writer, so if you come up as honestly, most writers I think I know have come up through role playing games in their younger days at least, is you are always making things for other people,
Mhm.
whether it's like three or four people around a gaming table or whether it's the wider audience that the book might have. Everything that you make is implicitly something you're going to be putting on show, and I think that's a really useful piece of sort of mental discipline
Were
to
you,
incorporate.
were you always the dungeon master?
Not always, but I was disproportionately the dungeon master, and I think it's because I liked that storytelling aspect and that kind of world building aspect of it.
It's always fun when you end up as a player when you play with friends or family and you decide to do something really ridiculous or try to find a way to break the game and then watch the dungeon master adjust to whatever decision you made. So I'm very curious. I mean, because it seems like you've always been drawn to story and writing. Did you enjoy those time periods where they made you sweat a little bit, doing
Well,
something that might have broken a scenario?
this is one of the things that makes that kind of game a really useful training ground, because what you learn after this is that, after your players have pulled that kind of switch on you a few times, is you learn to build a very robust world that goes considerably beyond any individual story you want to tell in it. And so when your players just hair off and do something completely random, you know what's over the next hill. You
Hmm.
know the you know the world in sufficient detail that you can just roll with the punches. And one of the things I think is enormously useful in a fantasy world, in a science fiction world on the page, is this feeling that it is not just there to tell this one specific story. It's not there as a vehicle for this one character. It's a bigger living world in and of itself in which these events just happen to be occurring.
It's one of the things that I love about your Tyrant's Philosopher series is the fact that you have expanded us to this giant world, and the fact that each book focuses, we may have some characters that sort of cross-pollinate across the series. Like when you read Lives of Bitter Rain, and you're introduced to Angilly. This book here slaps differently when you read it before you read the third book in the series, because it gives you a different idea of who Angeli really is.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things that I really loved is that if I read this before I read any of the other books, I'm going to get a certain take on her. And when I'm introduced to her in the third book, it completely sort of changes the game. And if I've read the third book and then read this brings a lot of the ideas and decisions that she's decided to make in the third book a little bit more to light. And that's what I
Yes,
thought it complements.
it's been a weird sort of tightrope act with this series, because I mean, thus far I've got four novels and a novella written, and I'm just starting to write the fifth novel. And I'm trying to keep up with this idea that each of these is an entry point for
Hmm.
the series. And honestly, if you read them in order, you get a bit more because you're recognizing the repeat characters that they turn up. But hopefully it's just kind of on this Easter egg level.
Hmm.
And thus far, everything has been independently readable. Now, in the fifth book, the one that I've just started, that is returning to the city of the first book. So that's going to really stretch my ability to make that an independent reading experience. So we will see if that actually works or not. But
It's incredibly difficult. Most writers decide, hey, if I'm gonna do and do this world building within the fantasy world, you've got to start with book one and finish on book five. And that's a complete story of the world. Whereas you did something incredibly bold and you said each book takes place in this world, but you can read them in any order. And I think that that's a relief for us fantasy readers a little bit.
well, it was very much so when I knew I wanted to write an actual bespoke series, and certainly a series that was going to go beyond three books. The the attitude of both publishers and readers to fantasy series has taken some considerable knocks in the last sort of 10 years, because obviously there have been a number of extremely high profile series that have not been and may never be finished.
Right.
So which which I appreciate as a reader. That's kind of aggravating if you're invested in the series and then it just sort of doesn't. Um, so one of the results of that is you have a body of readers who are quite leery about starting a series if they don't know that it's going to be finished. And if it's going to be like a 5 book series, that's not going to be finished for quite a while. And so writing these books so that each one is entirely a self-contained story, and that each one is not, it's not just, oh, this is book three and you have to have read the previous two. Because the other thing is, once if you're trying to kind of drum up a bit of marketing on a book, if you're trying to do a bookshop tour or something, and it's book three of a series, that's really quite difficult because you have a bunch of people in the bookshop and say, so who has read the previous books? And like half of them put their hand up and you think, right, what can I possibly say if this book is entirely dependent on the previous books, which a bunch of people here have not read? There's so little you can actually talk about at that point. And the stuff you can talk about is going to be not terribly interesting to the people who have read the previous books and who want to know about the new one. But having these books where each one is its own entry point is just really useful because you can do a little bit of a reading without needing to give 25 minutes of context beforehand, and you can genuinely say yes, you can jump right in, and if you liked it, why not go back to the first one and just pick up there. And it would be really interesting, though, it with the relationship between Days of Shattered Faith and Years of Bitter Rain, there is very much this two-way order of encountering them, and it hopefully will be a very different reading experience you'll get depending on which order you read them in. Um, but that kind of also applies across the series. So if you're reading them in order, you'll get to say, oh, we're now meeting these people later that we met in the first book, and now they're doing this, and then in the third book, oh, it's this guy again, and I was wondering what he'd been getting up to, and apparently it's this. But if you read them in another order, you realize, oh, this is the person who will become that person, and all of the bits that were kind of you have maybe had a sense were there but that weren't getting talked about, you were now getting to see them play out and all of that sort of thing. So hopefully you get this a different but satisfying experience whichever order you tackle them in. Although, I mean, honestly, going at them in order is probably just going to give you this tiny extra level of Easter egg stuff, because that's the order I'm writing them in.
And I love it when we have those Easter eggs. I have to think back on one of the authors who did it really brilliantly in the past few years was Taylor Jenkins Reid, who, did the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. And, as she's been writing her series, you have little characters that will pop in. And I think that that's really a clever way of kind of acknowledging your devout readers, but at the same time, it isn't essential. It isn't one of those things that if you didn't notice and then you went back and read something else, you'd be like, oh, that's where that character was, and that's where the character came from. And oh, that's a really neat touch. I often think of that as a reader when I'm introduced to a writer and I might be reading in the middle of a series. Um, and it's, I think, so important anymore because our lives are so busy that it's hard to justify giving somebody a book where they have to read six books before they can read the seventh.
Mm.
For the most part, I think that it's a very hard thing to do. And as a bookseller, I often see that I sell a lot of book one. You're the exception to the rule, where readers have picked up that they can pick up just about anywhere with your different series and go forward. Whereas like Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time, I always have book one. And then when I have a regular come in and they've picked up book one, you'll start seeing book two and three and four trickle in. Because of space, it's really hard. It's hard as a bookseller to justify a lot of um, real estate for certain
Mm.
series. You're like I said, you, Brandon Sanderson, Sergey Moss, oddly enough, I keep the entire sets
Oh, cool.
because we've got lots of readers who are needing to read through. But at the same time, what I love is that I'm always seeing somebody pick up a different book in the series with yours. So I better keep them all
Oh,
just in
that's
case.
that's very nice to hear. This does
Yeah.
remind me. I had a convention years ago, and you go to a convention, you get like a bag with some freebie books in quite often,
Yeah.
and publishers saying, "Excellent, we've got Shadows of the App book in the convention bag, so everyone is getting a copy of this Shadows of the App book." I think brilliant. Is that book one? I said, no, it's book seven, which is just like that's like the worst possible. It's far enough into the series that it's going to make zero sense to anyone, but at the same time spoil all the previous books. So what bizarre and unsatisfactory reading experience people had should they have actually attempted that? I do not know.
I think it was a clever and cunning plan. I remember one year my parents got me book five of The Malorian. I think it was probably like a B.
Mhm.
Dalton, um, uh, you know, probably a remaindered copy or something like that. But so they got me book five. So one summer, I spent the entire summer started because I tried reading book five and I had no idea what was going on. So I'm like, okay, I have to start with book one. And so I jumped into book one of The Malorian and realized I have no idea what's going on. I've got to go back to book one of the Belgariad. And then I read the entire summer. I read nothing but David Eddings, I think. But to read that one book that I got for Christmas. So, but it happens, and they could have gotten people reading your entire series there by giving a book seven. Probably clever and cunning plan there on their part, to quote um, oh gosh, Blackadder. I'm Rowan Atkinson.
Yeah.
Clever and cunning plan. Um, so, Adrian, when you're not writing, which it sounds like you almost always are, what are your do you still get together with friends and family for role playing and Dungeons and Dragons, or what are some of your hobbies that you do outside of writing nonstop?
Yeah, I mean, I still do tabletop gaming. Oh Lord, I'm in a fifth ed D&D game. I'm playing a Coriolis one shot at the moment. I ran a Daggerheart game recently, and I've just started running an Ars Magica campaign where we're going to end up meeting about twice a year because it's one of those getting
Yeah,
people together across large distances. And I've got to say, I mean, the introduction of tools like Zoom has been absolutely revolutionized gaming because my older gaming group that we used to get together 2 or 3 times a year, we now game like 2 weeks out of three, which is amazing.
right,
I paint Warhammer miniatures and I sketch um, because a lot of if I'm doing something to de-stress, I tend to still need to create something out of it to feel that
right.
I've actually used my time, which is not terribly mentally healthy, but that's just how it goes. Um, and yeah, that tends to be my major sort of non-writing hobbies.
Oh, I hear you. It's one of those things where, yeah, when we're not book selling or doing other things, I'm actually part of a Pathfinder. A friend of mine does a Pathfinder set, so right now that's what we're doing. I just finished doing a 5e round with some friends, and Zoom is amazing because for those of us who live all over the world or all over the country, we can still get together once a week and take a couple times and play and just talk and catch up. I always think that Dungeons and Dragons is a good thing for us nerds to get together and do while socializing and catching up with everything. But then we have something a little bit creative that we can do at the same time. And I think that creative brain always needs to sort of be going in what we're doing. In terms of your bookshelves behind you, Robin was noticing that you have some beautiful books there, and she's very curious what your favorite treasure is in those bookshelves behind you.
So the bookshelves on this side, that's all my stuff. So that's my shelves of my own books.
Hmm.
So I don't. I downstairs I actually have a shelf of like the special editions, which are more treasury, but these are just like the standard ones. Um, I've I have lucked into a few particularly nice editions. So I have there's a subterranean edition of R.F. Kuang's Babel, which is absolutely beautiful,
Absolutely.
which I got completely randomly because I'm doing a couple of books through Subterranean. They said, "Oh, we will send you some books," and I had seen this one on sale previously and thought, "I love this book, but it is far far too expensive for me to ever own." And then a copy just turned up in the post without me having to actually say anything. So that was very serendipitous. But Folio Society do some beautiful editions. So behind me here, you might be able to see. So I think their Dune series I've been slowly picking up as they come out,
Oh, nice.
and I've got they've got like a 3 volume set of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which is really nice.
That's that's quite the work. Talk about literary fantasy between Kwang's Babel and uh Susanna Clark's Doctor Strange and Mr. Norrell. I mean, those are footnotes right at the very bottom. Would you ever want to do a book where you did that, where you would have like footnotes and little fun asides associated with the characters in the world?
Um, I've been I've been tempted. It's one of those. I am not entirely sure I could keep it up because the problem is it's one of those. If you're going to do it, you've kind of got to do it throughout the book. It can't
Yeah.
just be 1 or 2 points, and so you end up. You really need to be someone like Terry Pratchett, where he's got that constant kind of double layer of he's telling the narrative, but he's also having a conversation with you as the reader at the same time. So maybe it is something I will do at some point. It will probably be in something more comedic.
Who are is Pratchett one of the authors that you admire?
Oh, good Lord, yes. Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
think he is. And honestly, on 2 levels. I mean, first of all, he is an absolute comedy genius, but he's also an astonishingly good world builder. The logic you can see in the way that the Discworld stories develop and the way that he moves the Discworld stories through time and thinks about the ramifications of the changes he's making are working at a much deeper level than a lot of fantasy, even though he's also writing comedies. Even though he doesn't take writing a comedy as an excuse to sort of slack off on any of the serious world work.
He never did, and we actually had him here for, I believe it was the World
Cool.
Con over in Tempe years and years ago, and it was such an honor to meet him. I always suggest to people to read The Color of Magic and the Light Fantastic, and probably the first Witches book, and then just choose whichever one you want to go into next, because I think they're brilliant. They brilliantly stand alone, a lot like your books do. And they'll make you smile. I love Conan the Barbarian. I mean, a Jewish barbarian is just a great, you know, I just always think of like, uh, skinny older man as a barbarian that's, he's tough as nails. Nope, you can call back when we're open. Sorry about that, guys. Um, Adrian, what is next for you? And do you have any talks about bringing any of your books to the big screen or to the small screen?
There are always talks, and we've certainly had some works optioned. And one of the things. It's very random. So, Children of Time is currently out on option and has been for some time. Um, and that is very much the book that made my name and it's my highest profile work. But then we have Saturation Point, which is a fairly low profile book, but probably far more filmable, that was picked up earlier this year. I've even had a contact recently about a short story that I wrote, which seems bizarre, but you never quite know what's going to catch people's attention and what someone's going to look at and think, oh, we can do something with that. And that something isn't necessarily going to be a beat for beat reconstruction of it on the screen, but it's just there are ideas in that work that they would like to use as a vehicle for the vehicle to build a TV series or a film around. Nothing has currently got anywhere near actually happening, which is absolutely the standard way these things go. But it's always very, very flattering for people to show any interest at all, in all honesty.
Is
Um,
there any that you would really like to see be made?
yeah, I mean, the problem is they're kind of a Venn diagram of things I really want to see brought to the screen and things that are in any way possible to bring to the screen. And there's very little overlap
Yeah.
in those circles. But so, I mean, again, Tyrant Philosophers, I would love for someone to do an animation or a live action or something of the Tyrant Philosophers. I mean, I can envisage it being something like, the team that did Arcane or something
Right.
like that would have an absolute field day with that. But I know also it's just like, this is a somewhat obscure very, very high concept secondary world. Um, it's frequent, it's settings in these fixed locations like cities, which are therefore more expensive
Hmm.
to present to people than a journey narrative, I think, and more complicated because you've got so much more going on in the setting than you would if you were just going from place to place and leaving things behind you that then didn't matter anymore. So I think it's never going to happen, but it's just like, yes, it would be, that would be lovely. And then there are certainly some of my works which I think are less well known, like there's a novella called Firewalkers, which I personally think would make an amazing film or TV series, but live action or again, or live action or animation, but you tend to have a certain amount of momentum or to come to or for a work to come to the attention of someone quite influential before it gets to that point where people are actually looking at maybe maybe asking after the option.
That's awesome. There's so many great works. I could see Children of Time being put onto the big screen, but I do think that it would be really hard to condense that series into 2 hours. I think almost a television series would be better to be able to explore that
It's
because of the
yeah, and
complicated.
it's Children of Time and Shroud is another one are tricky because actually if you could do the trappings of it,
Yeah.
which for Children of Time would basically kind of give you arachnophobia in outer space.
Yeah.
Um, but the heart and soul of the book is quite philosophical. It's to do with the thought processes of non-human things, which prose is very well suited to bringing over,
Hmm.
but visually would be really quite tricky, I think. Which is not to say it can't be done, because there have been some. I mean, Villeneuve's Arrival, the adaptation of Ted Chiang's short story, is absolutely one of those. Yes, I wouldn't have thought you could possibly have done anything based on that short story on screen because it is so high concept and so clever. And yet that film is amazing. So, it is very much one of those never say never sort of situations.
That's yeah. I mean it is. It's such a complicated, it's such a weird business. The For most authors, I often hear, yes, I will take your go ahead and option it. The paycheck is very nice. Thank you very much. And we often don't, some things start and then they never get made. I remember a good friend of mine, Weston Oakes. He had SEAL Team 666 optioned by The Rock and things were going well, and then the pandemic happened and everything
Mhm.
just sort of stopped, and just different projects got sloughed, and that was one of them that was there. um Adrian, other than Lives of Bitter Rain, do you have any other books coming out this year or early 2026?
Um, yes, so I have I've got a book coming out with Black Library, the Warhammer people this year, um, which I think is my last actual book for this year, which kind of one would hope so because it's going to be sometime in November. I can't talk about it because they haven't formally announced it. Early next year, though, we have a bit of a bonanza. So, Children of Strife, which is the fourth book in the children's series, is coming out. We have Pretenders to the Throne of God, which is coming out early next year as well. Which is going to be February in the UK and maybe a month later in the US, because that seems to be how that series works. And then a little later on that year, I have a book called Green City Wars out from Tor.com, or Reactor, I think, as they're now called, which, I mean, I've literally just delivered the proofs on that. And it's a book where I went through that final reading thinking, I can't believe I've got away with keeping all of this stuff in this book. The basic idea is it is a solar punk near future noir thriller where the main character is a raccoon.
That is awesome. That is you've hit every one of my buttons, including the raccoon right there. I love when Scalzi for starter villains, we were introduced to the foul-mouthed dolphins.
Yes.
And so, like, I latched onto that. I probably latched onto it a little bit too much, probably with him wanting to strangle me a little bit. But when characters go a little off the rails, I love it. I absolutely love it. Um, there's so many books, and so we're talking about what's coming out next year, and you're probably already writing for 2027 and 2028.
Yeah.
Um, and where your mind really is, because it's usually about a year between the time that you finish the book and the book's actually getting into publishing. Um, so I mean, you're probably you and only a couple others are probably the busiest writers in the business, and that's incredible. Do you feel like this is something you always have to do, or you eventually would like to slow down, or is that just not in your DNA?
I mean, at the moment, I'm going slightly faster than is comfortable, or not faster, but I'm slightly busier than is comfortable because what I did is I clawed a book's worth of space into my 2025, sorry, writing schedule in the thing. Oh, I would be quite nice to take on a project outside the normal kind of stuff I'm writing for existing publishers. And then I managed to commit, I managed to basically agree to do three separate books in that slot because each time I thought, oh, I've got that slot free. I can fit that project in, no problem. And then realizing, right, now I've got three books, I need to write in a book's worth of space. So that's been challenging. And I have rather had to run to keep up. But I I can't not write.
Right.
I can go about a week or 2 weeks without writing new stuff, and I get very, very twitchy. And I'm generally happiest when I know I've got something I can just chew through. And each morning I can sit down and say, right, I will write the next bit of the thing I'm working on, and that's what my mind has been processing, and I'm ready to go. Um, and I, my, if I have a secret to actually be able to get out as much as I do, I think it basically comes down to because I do all of that world building at the beginning, all of the details I am putting into that book mesh with everything else.
Yeah.
All of the characters fit. What I don't need to do generally is go back for serious rewrites or big second drafts or anything like that because I'll go through and cut down because I do tend to be too overwrite in my first draft. But I don't generally have to make any big sweeping structural changes or anything like that,
That's
unless I get it wrong, of course.
That's incredible. And that it makes a lot of sense when you're doing that initial work to there. Well, for those of you who want to or who haven't read Adrian before, I really do recommend Lives of Bitter Rain. I think that this is a great novella, a great introduction to Adrian's work. Angilly's a really wonderful character. Um, and I think that this is a great place to start you off in the Tyrant Philosophers series. And then if you like that, uh, read them however you want to read them, because that's the best way to be a reader. And Adrian, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time out. We had a little bit of a snafu last week with scheduling, so thank you again for reworking your schedule a little bit to talk with us today. And, it's such an honor again to talk with you, sir, to take the time and talk about your writing and get us to know you a little bit better.
You're very welcome. It's always very, very nice to be invited on things like this.
Excellent. Well, to our online audience, we thank you very much. And we will see you soon. We've got another program in about 2 hours with Margaret Mizushima and Kathleen Donnelly for their new books here in the store. So we'll be going live there. And we wish you all a really great day. You go ahead and just end live video and and stream there. And oh, wonderful. Adrian, thank you so much